I would like to welcome everybody at our Ringvorlesung, China Center of Asian International Gravity. And we start today with one of our lecturers, Joseph CHADWIN, and his theme, a modern reading of Chinese philosophy and religion. And before I give the word to Joseph, I would like to just give a brief introduction to everyone so that we know who our speaker today is. Joseph CHADWIN is an FWF Fellow in Religious Studies at the University of Vienna. So he is joining from the capital of Austria. Particularly, he is favoring ethnographic methodologies, and his teaching and research predominantly pertains to childhood and adolescent religiosity, Chinese religion, Buddhism, Hinduism, and religious education. So very interesting topics today that we probably will be also touching upon. And from his background, he studied at the universities of Aberdeen, Oxford, Cambridge, and Beijing. So we've been discussing this also just recently. Lots of knowledge about China firsthand. Before coming to Vienna, Joseph was working in Beijing for a couple of years as a lecturer and researcher. So Joseph also has a lot of experience with Chinese students. So Joseph, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And we're looking forward to your lecture. Please.
Thank you so much for having me. Just before we start, please do interrupt me at any point for clarifications or questions or comments. I mean, well, I'd love to have a discussion afterwards as well, but really do interrupt me. I'm going to start by problematizing things. There will be a lot of problematizing things in this session. We're going to be doing a reading of Chinese philosophy and religion, but both of these terms are incredibly problematic. And I would like you to constantly have in the back of your head that, yeah, as has already been mentioned, my background is ethnography. And my main reason for this is because I think that is really the only way that we can successfully look at contemporary belief in the Chinese context. This is especially given the fact that I'm a white Brit, and it would be so problematic for me to sit here and tell you, this is what Chinese people believe, and this is what I say Chinese people believe. Everything I say today has been taken from ethnographic research. So do not take my word for it, take Chinese people's word for it. So every time I say something, keep in the back of your head that I am a white British person, and that's, well, yeah, what I say is that's problematic. We're going to start very briefly by looking at the statistics. As you can see straight off the bat, the statistics are pretty impossible to work with. Studies place the religious population of China anywhere between 0.5% to 85%. This is the only country in the world where you've got a ridiculous disparity like that. However, the majority of studies say that the religious population of China is extremely low. This picture was taken at Yonghegong, or the Lama Temple. It's a beautiful Buddhist temple in Beijing. And as you can see here, it's flooded with people. These people, if you were to ask them, what are you doing right now? They would tell you, well, we're offering incense. And they might be offering incense to, there is a big statue of Guanyin, who is a bodhisattva of compassion, or a goddess, if you want to use that word, of compassion. They tell you that they're asking her for various boons, or maybe they're asking one of the smaller deities or bodhisattvas who reside at that temple. If you were to ask them, the vast majority, I would bet everything, that the vast, vast, vast majority of people in this picture, if you were to ask them, are you religious? The answer would be a resounding no. If you were to ask them, are you a Buddhist? Despite doing what is quite clearly Buddhist practice in a Buddhist temple, the answer would be a resounding no. However, what we can see here is, in a European context, religious practice and religious belief. These people, however, even though they're at this Buddhist temple doing Buddhist practices, they could conceivably, 10 minutes later, hop across the road, less than 5 minutes away. It's literally opposite this temple. There is the Beijing Temple of Confucius. They could conceivably go to that temple and give an offering to Confucius. Again, if you were to ask them, are you doing something religious right now? The answer would be no, absolutely not. We're going to spend the rest of this session looking at this seeming contradiction. Popular religion or popular belief or popular philosophy, doesn't really matter what you call it, there is this thing that exists in China. There's no appropriate name for it. There is definitely no centralized monk or priesthood or centralized professionals, basically, who practice this religion. There's certainly no uniformity of belief. If you were to ask someone from Beijing, someone you can see in this picture, what are you doing? And then go to a rural temple nearby, the beliefs would be totally different. And sometimes the practices would be totally different. There's no orthodoxy. There's no knowledge, no orthodox knowledge about ritual practice. There's certainly no identified origin of this belief or religion. And this entire religion, all of it, is embedded in the lives of ordinary people. It is a household religion. And finally, throughout history, there are varying regional practices, and then they serve varying historical functions. I would argue that popular religion in China, or popular belief in China, you can very generally compartmentalize it into 3 different components. There's a metaphysical component, there is a ritual component, and there is a philosophical component. We're going to look at each of these individually. So, gods, ancestors, and ghosts, they make up the metaphysical component of Chinese popular religion. They're essentially 3 categories of supernatural beings. So from this, we can ascertain the metaphysics, how the universe is traditionally or typically seen as comprised in the Chinese context. They are, all 3 of them, invested with moral authority and model and are subsequently modeled by the social and political structure of the living. We're going to start with gods. We'll start very briefly. I won't do this all too much in this session, but I think especially because the Chinese written language gives us so much information, and I personally think it's quite beautiful. I think it's very useful to look at the Chinese term tiansheng when you're looking at what a god actually is. When we think, or personally, when I hear the term God spoken to me in English, the first thing that snaps to my head is the Christian God. It's just the cultural background that I grew up with. However, the Christian God is very, 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 very misleading in the Chinese context. Chinese gods are absolutely nothing like the Christian God. The gods in the Chinese context, we get more information from it by looking, instead of the English term God, but the Chinese term that starts with this character, Tian. Basic translation would be sky or heaven. And then this is Shen. That's a really useful character. On the left-hand side of it, you've got a character that, modern sense, it would translate as to show or to reveal, but the original meaning of this character was simply an ancestral tablet or a sacrificial altar or just an altar for the gods. So that's on one side of it. And the second half of the character, the right-hand side, is both a sound component, Shen, and also the meaning component. It's also a meaning component, a thunderbolt. So these are beings who reside in the sky or in the heavens that are definitely worthy of going to an altar to. They're worthy of reverence. And the lightning bolt denotes that they have astounding power. They sometimes can control nature. There's sometimes much more abstract things, compassion. Either way, they have a lot of power and also moral authority. In China, there are absolutely a countless number of deities. It's impossible to enumerate them all, especially when you think that villages that are geographically very close to each other, their local temples might have totally different gods. And someone from this village, if they were to visit the village over here, they would have never heard of the god in this new temple. Different gods typically can affect different aspects of life. They have different areas of expertise. There are river deities, there are mountain deities, there are household deities, there are kitchen deities, and each one of them are intrinsically concerned with different things. They, from the heavens, uphold moral order. They uphold the moral order of here, the mortal realm. I'll introduce you or remind you of a couple of the main ones. First one we'll look at is a kitchen god, a kitchen deity, probably the most famous of them all. Sometimes he's called the kitchen god. He's sometimes called god of the stove. In translations that I am not very fond of, he's sometimes called Mr. Kitchen. I think that sounds a little bit silly personally, but you might hear him as Mr. Kitchen. If you were to visit a Chinese home, it is not uncommon to find the kitchen god, a picture of him, or sometimes, in rarer cases, a little statue of him in the kitchen. And what he does every single day is he listens. He listens to the conversations that people have in the home, and he writes them down. Every single Spring Festival, or Chinese New Year, or Chunjie, he will then take this piece of paper and report back to heaven. That's why every Spring Festival, which is the most important festival in the Chinese calendar, every Spring Festival, there is often various rituals. I've seen a lot of very, very different ways of making the kitchen god happy. My personal favorite one was this family who took this red paper with a blessing basically from this character, from this kitchen god, and they dipped this paper in honey until the whole thing was covered in honey. And then they put that honey covered piece of paper before a picture very much like this. When I asked them why they did this, they said, well, this is the paper he's now going to write on, and he'll then take that piece of paper up to heaven. And when the Jade Emperor reads what we've been saying, the words will be so sweet because of the honey. To another family, say on the other side of China, or maybe even in a village close by, they might think that that practice is absolutely ridiculous. And they would wonder, why would you dip it in honey? No. What you need to do is just give him an offering of food, or say nice words to him on the day that you know that he's going to go up and report. There are several, or some might set off fireworks or give incense to him. There are a plethora of different practices, and definitely no unity of belief there, but the importance is in the ritual. We'll come more to that later. Mentioned him before. This is the Jade Emperor. He's not as important as he used to be, but he's still everywhere. You see him all over the place in temples and popular life. He's essentially the highest ruler of heaven. He's the Lord of the gods, the strongest among the gods. I've written here that this isn't so important for you to know, he's sometimes the assistant of one of the three pure ones who are the primordial deities within the tradition of Taoism, but I'm definitely not going to go into that, because if you were to ask a regular Chinese person walking down the street, could you tell me a bit about the primordial manifestations of the Tao, they would have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. There's loads of stories associated with the Jade Emperor. My personal favorite one is one of his origin stories. Basically, when the world was still in its infancy, it was quite primordial, it was kind of chaotic. Monsters were everywhere, and the gods kind of did their best to keep on top of things, but monsters kind of did what they wanted until this great, great evil monster, the most powerful of them all, thought, you know what, I think I've got a good shot at ruling this world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cultivate. Cultivate is, it's a bit of a loaded term, but basically, it comes from especially the Taoist context. One can cultivate the Tao within your own body. And if you can cultivate the Tao and see and manifest the Tao within your own body, you can achieve many, many special powers. People who cultivate for an extended period of time are said to be able to do magic, do astounding things. And what this great evil monster did, he passed 3,000 trials. It depends who's telling the story, but sometimes these trials are, one trial takes 3 million years, and he passed 3,000 of them. Completed number 3,000 and thought, I'm invincible. There is absolutely no one in the universe who can stand up to me now. So he stops cultivating, marches straight up to heaven, and just demolishes all the gods. They didn't stand a chance against him. What he didn't know is the Jade Emperor had previously seen all of this chaos going on in the world and thought, well, I need to do something about this, but I'm not wise enough, I'm not powerful enough, so I need to cultivate. He passed 3,200 trials. And then when he came out, completed number 3,200, realized there's absolute chaos ruling the universe, challenges this great evil monster, and because he passed 200 more trials, his cultivation prowess was far above that of the monster, vanquishes him, easily vanquishes him. And all of the other gods say, clearly you are the greatest among us all. Please rule heaven for us. Please be the highest of the high. So he agrees, and that's where he is now. Chances are, unlike with Christianity, where the origin story, the creation of the universe, is very, very important, this origin story for the Jade Emperor isn't important at all. And the vast majority of the Chinese people would not be able to tell you that story, might have never heard of it. What is important is that they know that they can go to the Jade Emperor and he is powerful, really, really powerful. However, and this is where gods are very, very different to the Christian context, for example, they're fallible. They are not all powerful. Hypothetically speaking, there could be a monster out there who's cultivating right now. If they'd cultivated for, let's say, 3,201 trials, they're stronger than the Jade Emperor, and then we're a bit screwed. Moreover, if you ask the Jade Emperor for something, chances are the Jade Emperor might not hear you. Because the Jade Emperor is so prevalent, is so famous, is so known, lots of people go to him. It's therefore increasingly less likely that the Jade Emperor will hone in on one individual person. That's why today it's a lot more typical to go to the Jade Emperor for something huge, something regarding the country, something even regarding the world at large. There was, I recently had a conversation with someone who had just become a parent in China, and he decided to go to the Jade Emperor to ask him for help about climate change. He suddenly became really worried about climate change because of his child, and thought that the Jade Emperor was the only one with enough power to really, really do something about it. I'm gonna skip ahead now. Door deities. This is something you can see in Austria, in Chinese restaurants, even in Chinese homes. Very, very common. You put two representations of deities on your door, and you change them during festivals, usually spring festivals. This is two pictures taken during a spring festival celebration. Here are the old, and they replaced them with the new ones. There are many, many door deities. You might have come across, chances are you have come across, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's one of the great classics of Chinese literature. Two of the characters from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so Guan Yu and Zhang Fei, two great warriors, two of the three sworn brothers, main characters of the book, really. They became deified, and they're very, very common door deities today. Simply put, they protect your family home. Easy as that. This is my personal favorite, and probably the most famous, probably the one that if you have never been to China and if you don't know very much about China, this is the most likely god that you have come across. He's the Monkey King, Sun Wukong. He comes from, again, one of the four great classics of Chinese literature, Journey to the West. There is nothing I can say that will accurately portray how popular this god is in China. Everyone knows him. It would be as if Jesus were to combine, I can't think of a character, a fictional character or a popular character that is popular, maybe something from the Marvel universe, maybe Superman, or I really don't know. There is no one, I think, that compares in the Western context. Everyone knows Monkey King, and it's everywhere in media, in popular culture, in festivals, in dramas. There's countless series, countless books, countless video games. They love him. However, he is also a god. He is also a deity that you can very much go to and ask for help. My work is, as has already been mentioned, is usually with kids. Sun Wukong is therefore my personal favorite because he is typically, in my experience, the personal favorite of children. We look at these pictures and or at least I look at these pictures and it's adorable. There are adorable outfits you can buy absolutely everywhere in China. However, this transcends being just cutesy. One of the most eye-opening moments I had in China with the relationship between, so there are two, actually. I'll give you two stories here. The first one would be when I met a baby, newborn baby, and the parents decided to dress him up as Sun Wukong. At first, I thought they were just being cutesy, taking pictures and putting them on social media for just the sake of that. However, then I realized that they presented the baby in Sun Wukong garb to the grandparents, and the grandparents just fell about. They weren't concerned about the cutesy nature of it. What they were concerned with is, oh my God, he's evoking the Monkey King. That is so efficacious. That's going to stand him in really good stead. And he's even wearing the color red. Perfect. To the parents, it was both. They were doing it to make the grandparents happy as well, but they were also doing it because it's adorable. The second story was when I was doing field work. I mean, all of my field work is field work because most of it is just playing with children and then asking them about it. One of the most popular games, and one specific example, was in a park after school. Big group of mostly boys, but girls as well. They were playing Monkey King. They were all of them pretending to be the Monkey King. They were all doing the classic pose that you can see here with the hand holding the staff, the leg extended and curved. But then when I talked to the kids about it, I was really quite taken aback. Now I find it quite normal, but I was initially taken aback with the amount who said that Sun Wukong's awesome, but he's also someone we can go to for help. If one specific example, there was a boy who was being bullied at school. He couldn't talk to his parents about it. He was too scared that they would be ashamed. Couldn't talk to his grandparents about it. Same reason. Couldn't talk to his teachers about it. Same reason. He did not want to look weak. So he went to the strongest figure he knew, the Monkey King, Sun Wukong, and he asked Sun Wukong for help. There is this, and you just, maybe I am completely mistaken, and in Graz, you would go to a playground and you would see all of these kids running around pretending to be Jesus, beating up people in the temple for doing wrong things in the house of God. I would be very surprised. However, in China, totally normal. Our next category of supernatural beings are ancestors. They are not regarded as deities. They are, simply put, people who have died in this mortal realm and have moved on to the next realm. When a person dies, if they have someone to look after them in death, they will become an ancestor. We'll come to what happens if you don't have someone to look after you in death. But basically, and again, this was quite surprising to me when I first moved to China and saw the extent to which how mundane the afterlife is in China really surprised me. You need food in the afterlife, you need money in the afterlife, and you need entertainment in the afterlife. That just continues. The only thing that changes is you're not in the mortal realm anymore, and you're a bit more powerful because you can affect the mortal realm. They have the power to help the living. If you help your ancestors, they'll help you in turn. It's a bit of a, I'll scratch your back and we'll scratch yours. There's a debate, however, that takes place commonly that is basically asks, is ancestor commemoration, is that just memorial? Is that like simply remembering someone who's died? Or is it a religious action or interaction with a supernatural being? My answer to that is I couldn't care less, because Chinese people couldn't care less. This is wholly a debate that has taken place in the Western European context. The Chinese rights controversy, which was very much missionary controversy that took place in China, and it's sometimes even taught as this big debate that happened in China as to whether we should see commemoration as being religious or just secular. This was happening in the Vatican. It was happening between missionaries. The Chinese people, they couldn't care less if they're communicating with a supernatural being. In fact, they'd tell you, no, it's not a supernatural being, because the word supernatural is very loaded. They would say, no, it's not a supernatural being. No, it's not a religious being. It's my grandfather. I'm giving my grandfather or long lost ancestor, he needs to eat, or she needs to eat, or she needs money. This has not got nothing to do with the religion. I'm just doing what needs to be done. Or I'm asking them for help because maybe my business is struggling, or I've got an exam coming up. It's just completely mundane, completely normal. Most Chinese homes will have some form of a shrine. Some of them are huge. Some of them are an entire room dedicated to the ancestors. Some of them are tiny. Some of them are just maybe a tiny little picture, or maybe one picture, or just two pictures. Doesn't matter. What matters is that home shrines are pretty crucial, pretty central to Chinese popular religion. Ghosts are another category of supernatural beings. If you die in the Chinese context and you do not have someone to commemorate you, to look after you in death, children, you become a ghost. There are other ways you can become a ghost, depending on who you ask. Some people will tell you that you can become a ghost if you get killed in battle, or if you're murdered even, you might become a ghost because you've died in a really horrible way. Other people will tell you that the only way to become a ghost is dying without someone to look after you. Doesn't matter. Ghosts are constantly subject to suffering. They are beings, supernatural beings, that are worthy of our pity. Sometimes fear for the particularly nasty ones, but they are definitely not seen as beings that you should shun. They're beings that you need to ask to leave. You can't really kill them. You can pacify them, get them to leave your home, but basically there are two kinds. There are malevolent ones who will do their utmost to cause you harm, and then there are simply those who, maybe it was just an elderly person who died without ever having kids, and they're just really, really sad. So they're deserving of people's pity. To briefly look at the character, just because I think it's an interesting one, the character gives us the information of being a picture of an enlarged cranium. In a traditional Chinese world, you had the belief, you sometimes find it today, but very rarely, that when one dies, one's essence leaves through the part of one's head that is soft when one's a baby. That's why you still get these practices, especially in rural China, when there is still the soft spot right on the tip of one's head, the baby is particularly susceptible to outside supernatural influence. It's not until it closes up that they're safe. That's why there are many, many rituals to ensure that the baby's protected from these outside malevolent influences. That's what this is showing. This is essentially showing the essence of one leaving the body from the head. Nice little character. Typically, if something really bad is happening in one's life and you can't explain why it's happening, you might go to your local temple, and maybe the person at the temple will tell you, well, I'm afraid there is a ghost residing in your house. And then there are absolutely countless different practices to deal with them. Varies completely on who you ask and where you happen to be. That takes us to practice, though. Actually, one final point, just while we're on, I briefly mentioned rural China. Maybe we'll have time for a proper discussion about this later, but there is a big, big difference between what popular religion looks like in rural China and what it looks like in the cities. I would argue that popular religion is very, very much there in the cities, but it's just harder to see. In rural China, you see much more overt statements and beliefs. For example, I once did some field work in a very, very, very rural. I was very rural insofar as I was the first Westerner that they had all seen. There was a small local temple there, and the main deity in that temple, who was totally, totally local to that village, she was this standing statue, and at this statue's feet were all of these naked babies kind of trying to crawl up her. Naked male babies. There still exists a belief in a lot of especially rural China, and sometimes in cities as well, just depends who you ask, but in rural China, very much a belief that only boys, only males can commemorate. Girls are born to be given to another family. Only males can commemorate. At this same village, it was quite tragic, really. There was this woman who had recently given birth, and she had given birth to a girl, and she essentially became a bit of a pariah. There was all this whispering in the village that she simply hadn't tried hard enough to get a boy. She should have gone to the temple more. She should have asked that deity more for a boy. However, this is changing rapidly. The vast majority of young people I speak to today would say, God, I couldn't care less about this. If I want to commemorate my parents, like, doesn't matter if I have a penis or vulva, anyone can commemorate. And frankly, this is also the case with their parents. They are actually quite happy, especially with the legacy of the one-child policy. A lot of them are happy to just take a step back and say, yeah, I'd be more than happy for my daughter to commemorate me. If anything, the main voices of opposition comes from the older generation, so the grandparents who, but frankly, we're moving rapidly in the direction of less so in rural areas, but especially in cities, and especially among affluent middle class or the educated. Gender's got very, very little to do with it. We've touched already a little bit on practice, but these are two lovely terms that I think that encapsulate the, let's call it the ritual component of Chinese popular religion. If you look at the characters on their own, they're pretty misleading because they have huge semantic variety. However, in the realm of Chinese popular religion, they mean it's essentially the embodiment of religious belief through one's actions, one's bodily actions. Peng, a very good scholar of Chinese religion, says that it's essentially doing religion that might be filtered out by etic concepts and categories. This can take on so many different forms. But what's important to know is that they are obligatory. They are obligatory actions in which belief is comparatively unimportant. If you were to ask a Chinese person who is commemorating their ancestors, why are you doing this? That would be quite a strange question to them. They'd often give you the answer of, because it needs to be done. If you were to push them a bit further, then you'd eventually get to believe that they do genuinely believe that they do have ancestors that have very real implications on their day-to-day lives, that they can help their ancestors and their ancestors can in turn help them. But really, ritual comes first. Ritual is what's important. And there are countless. You might give incense to your ancestors. You might give food to your ancestors. You might give toys to your ancestors if they were particularly playful in life. You might burn money to your ancestors because ancestors need money in the afterlife. And so the only way to do that is often seen as burning ancestral money so that it literally rises up to the heavens. I recently wrote a paper about students who were essentially trapped in Vienna during COVID, and they couldn't return to China for Spring Festival. And some of them were having a problem with, this was the first time in their lives they were thinking about the implications of burning money and wondering, if I were to burn money in Vienna, would it reach my ancestors or not? And they were genuinely grappling with this question, asking their parents, should I do this or should I not? Others were who wanted to give an offering to their ancestors because they were worried that because they weren't going home, they felt like they had something of an obligation to do so themselves. They'd never actually thought about it. So this poor student who was observing lockdown and had made baozi, or steamed buns, and she made them and she gave them to her ancestors, and then she had the problem of, oh God, what do I do with them now? My family always gift the baozi to poor people or another family, but it's lockdown. And she was really grappling with, do I go round to my next door neighbor and offer them the bath, or is that unacceptable because of lockdown? Poor thing was really struggling with this, but it was the first time she'd thought about it. And again, it just shows that belief is secondary. Another lovely example, I think, of belief being secondary, but still being there, was this elderly couple. Well, they were parents, but they were parents to adult children. And I've been staying with them for a while, and the guy had been complaining about a bad back the whole day, but he didn't really know why. And I was then just chatting to him for a bit, and suddenly there was this big scream of anger coming from the other room where the ancestral shrine happened to be. And in comes his wife saying, "You stupid, stupid, stupid old man. Why is there a chocolate bar? Why did you offer a chocolate bar to your ancestors? You know for a fact that your grandfather hated chocolate. Of course you've got a bad back, you stupid, stupid old fool." And instead of arguing against her, this guy just went, "Oh yeah, that was really stupid of me." And he immediately left, went out and bought some tea, gave that to his ancestor, and then all was good in the world again. What's important here is the belief was there. It was clear that these people very much believed that one's actions to the ancestors very much impacted their day-to-day lives, and they had to amend this with a very real action. However, that belief very much came second to the action. He knew what he had to do. It just wasn't really a question of why. Again, this is such a difference of Chinese popular religion to the Christian context. Christians' belief is entirely primary. Whether or not God exists is totally a debate that takes place within theology. Whether or not ancestors exist, whether or not ghosts or gods exist, the vast majority of Chinese people just don't care. What they care about is whether or not their actions are efficacious or not. That takes us finally to the philosophical component of Chinese popular religion. Again, these two terms have a lot of semantic variety. They can be quite misleading, but also quite useful. So Bao is especially a nice context because it gives us so much in this character. You've got you can't really see it in modern Chinese, but this used to be, the left-hand side of the character used to be a depiction of handcuffs. You've then got this part of the character here that essentially depicts someone kneeling. And this nice character down here shows a hand. Take it all together, you've got handcuffs, you've got someone kneeling, and you've got a hand. It is someone, a criminal, being put into handcuffs as they are kneeling down. Therefore, in a Chinese popular religious context, retribution, or to retribute. In essence, these two characters give us reciprocity. Reciprocity is, I think, the most important philosophical component of the entirety of Chinese popular religion. We, as humans, live in a universe that is fundamentally hierarchical, and it is moved by this. It's moved by, the reciprocal nature of everything. Every action you do has a consequence. One acts because of one's necessary reciprocal obligation within this universe. So Oxfeld writes that Chinese religion is essentially built upon the combination of moral modeling often of gods and ancestors, and reciprocal obligation within a hierarchical structure. That all sounds complicated, but I think if you look at the most obvious manifestation of this, it becomes actually quite straightforward. Xiao. Xiao is usually translated as filial piety. I don't personally like that translation because it's got piety in it. And piety has it's got Christian connotations and a long history of Christian connotations. So I try to avoid that. I either leave it untranslated or I call it filiality. Either's fine. Again, Chinese is just being beautiful here. It gives us so much the character. It tells us, simply put, in modern Chinese, if we were to go further back, you can't, it's different, albeit the same, but I won't go into that now. But the modern rendering of Xiao, you've got a child, and the child is at the bottom of the character, and on top of the child is an old person. You can see it, you can see the picture. It is literally a young person carrying an old person, or a child carrying an old person. It is taken to mean, on the family level, one has moral obligations, and it goes both ways. The parent is on top. Not only does that show that the child has an obligation to carry the parent later on in life, but it also tells us that the parent is above the child in a moral sense. When they are raising the child, they have a moral obligation, they have a filial duty to raise that child to be good, to raise that child to be a good filial citizen. Similarly, that child has a moral obligation to their parent to work hard, to strive. Typically, the most obvious way that a child can be filial to their parent is to do well in school. If they do well in school, they'll do well later on in life. If they do later on in life, they'll be all the better equipped to look after their parents in old age. There is a prevalent belief that still very much exists in China today that one is infinitely, and I mean infinitely, indebted to their parents for not only giving birth to them, but for also raising them. And one pays their parent back by, once the parent dies, or in old age, in a very mundane level, looking after them in old age, but then once they die, looking after them in death. Basically, you can then extend it, just like an onion. So at the core of the onion, you've got the family structure. The next outer layer would be, at the core of the onion, you've got children. Next layer, you've got parents. Next layer, grandparents. Then an outer layer would be city officials, or then state officials. And then in old China, you've got the emperor. I'm sure you've all heard of the mandate of heaven. That very much comes from this structure built on this reciprocity, obligation. And finally, at the outermost layer of the onion, you've got heaven, you've got Tian, where the gods reside, or also where the ancestors reside. They are the ones with the highest moral authority. A way this is played out in day-to-day Chinese life is with these, and you'll have, I'm sure, come across them before. They're called little red packages, or hongbao. Children get given these on special occasions. Sometimes they're given them on birthdays, but most traditionally they are given them on festival days, such as Spring Festival, such as Chinese New Year. I have done a lot of interviews with children who have just received a little red package, and it is amazing how many of them essentially speak from a script. They will tell me with usually very, very serious, earnest expression that we've been given this because our parents love us so much. You can almost feel the filial obligation of the parents giving the child money early on in life so that the child then later pays the parent back later on. So many children are acutely aware of this. If you were to ask a child, why are you working so hard right now at school? They would tell you, because I want to make my parents happy. Parents will tell their children overtly, I want you to do well at school to make us happy. Maybe those who are a bit more shameless will say, because I want you to make our family look good. But I think all of this is deeply, deeply tied to the concept of xiao, to the concept of one's filial obligations to one's parents. I'm going to briefly now, again, because it gives us so much and at the same time, so misleading. This is both a wonderful word and a really, really harmful, dangerous word. It's dangerous because it is this term, which translates to religion, that has given us false data. It's given us false data because our word religion in the European context is inextricably, there's nothing we can do about it. It is fundamentally tied to the Christian context. Tomoko Masazawa, an excellent academic, argues that Europeans or Westerners can't help but, especially when conducting religious studies, we can't help but construct Christianity as the proto-religion. That's why when we speak in English, we ascribe English terms to terms that frankly can't be translated. That's why, for example, you've got Buddhist priests or Taoists who pray. Those terms, to pray or priests or gods even, they all are loaded with our Christian context. And therefore, when you translate religion into Chinese and you get this term, 宗教, and you were to ask a Chinese person, are you religious? Because of how fundamentally different belief is between Europe and China, you will get a fundamentally misleading answer. It is easy to argue that pretty much everything I have been talking about today has been religious in a European context. I've been talking about gods, I've been talking about ancestors, I've been talking about all these rituals to appease and to please and all these supernatural beliefs. But we cannot ignore that Chinese people would say, no, this is not religion. Therefore, I would urge everyone here to be very, very, very careful. I would be the last person to say that actually what Chinese people are doing is they're wrong. They actually are doing religion. No, it's their word over my word. What's wrong is the word religion and how misleading it is. That's why you've got all of these statistics that say that China is the most irreligious country in the world, or Chinese immigrants are the most irreligious of all immigrant nationalities. It's because if you were to ask them, are you religious? They'll say no. And therefore, that's usually where the conversation ends. It just doesn't acknowledge all of these plethora of beliefs in gods, in ancestors, and all of these ritual practices that we would very much call religion. I would therefore, like I said, urge people to be exceptionally careful with the word religion. However, because we need to call it something, and because our language here is English, I would argue that this is religion for lack of a better name. And also, if you were to look at this, these are amazing characters. They are useful characters. At the top of Zong, you've essentially got a roof. And the roof is over. Here's a character that we've seen before today. Sure, it's an ancestral shrine. You've got a roof over an ancestral shrine. Pretty straightforward what that character is trying to tell us. Here is another character we've seen already today. Xiao, it's one's filial obligations. And on the other side, taken together, you've got, basically put, the whole thing together, you've got teachings. This is essentially saying that it's a teaching of Xiao. It's a teaching, someone teaching Xiao. And taken together, you've got a ancestral place of residence, or even a god's place of residence. And I mean, on its own, Jiao is typically seen as teaching, but I would argue that the character of Jiao is fundamentally religious insofar that it has the character of fealty within it. Therefore, taken together, it's a useful character that gives us a lot of information about Chinese popular religion, but if you were to use it in Mandarin, it's misleading because this is not what people see themselves as practicing. Final point, Chinese popular religion is deeply, deeply informed by Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. I would argue that a lot of scholars get this wrong because they say that Chinese popular religion is Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. I would argue it's more than that because regional beliefs are so important within it, and it does it a disservice saying that it's Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism alone. However, it is because of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism informing popular belief, and similarly, popular belief informing Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, that it's possible to get this cherry-picking culture. It's totally normal to go to a Buddhist temple and then go to a Taoist temple, depending on what you want. It would not make very much sense to go to Guanyin, who is a bodhisattva, Buddhist deity of compassion, if you wanted to do well at school, because she's concerned with compassion. It would make a lot of sense to go to Confucius, Kongzi. He's totally involved in education. That's why during exam season, Confucius temples throughout China are often flooded with students and their parents asking for help. Contrariwise, you wouldn't really make sense to go to Confucius if you've hurt yourself because he's not very good at dealing with that. You'd go to someone who can heal you, someone who's typically seen as a healer, like Guanyin. And it's this cherry picking that just does not exist in a European context, simple as that, that is such a central component to Chinese popular religion. So you can't remove Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism from popular belief, but it's not exclusive. So to wrap up, popular belief is essentially, or popular belief or religion, is built upon everyday belief and practice. It is not built on a central text. It's not built on a priesthood. It is built on your everyday people and what they do. What many in Europe would regard as religious is irreligious in the Chinese context. And cherry picking is combined with rationality. This has come up again and again and again in my interviews, that the difference between what people practice in China and religion in Europe, for example, is what one does in China is rational and religion is irrational. A family who were having a hard time because their daughter had just converted to Christianity and they just didn't understand it at all. And they were telling me how Christianity it's just fundamentally irrational because it's religion. And it's irrational because people, Christians, pray to one God. And if that prayer isn't immediately answered, they will then pray again to the same God, and they'll keep praying to the same God. This family, as these parents, totally acknowledged that the Christian God is powerful. He must be if so many people pray to him, but it just doesn't make rational sense to keep praying to someone if they're obviously not responding. The rational thing to do would be to then go to another God, try somewhere else. That is why religion is totally irrational, and Chinese popular religion, Chinese popular belief, that allows for cherry picking. That allows for, it makes sense to stop doing something if you're not getting the result that you want. Or if something bad is happening, it makes sense to do something about it. They also see again, a different family were talking about why Christianity is irrational, because there's so much emphasis on one suffers for a reason and you've just got to deal with it. No, they argued that no, if I'm suffering, I'd go out and do something about it. And if this one temple isn't helping, just go to a different one. A religious person would just go, God sent this for a reason, and there's nothing I can do about it. Maybe just pray to him to help me get through it. That's irrational to Chinese popular religion. I will end it there, but very, very equally open that up to any questions or comments. Thank you.